mighty Sigma, savior of the Empire, give me strength. For though I dedicated my life to eradicating it, it feeds, it grows, devouring all. There must be a final answer to halt its advance. But the tide of war seems endless.
It's something that's been talked about for a long time. A lot of fans have always talked about it, whether they're Total War fans or Warhammer fans. And Creative Assembly have wanted to do a fantasy game for a long time, but it's only recently they've got to that place, that capacity to be able to do a fantasy game in addition to the historical games that we're well known and loved for. At the same time, Games Workshop were looking to leverage the Warhammer IP, and the stars aligned, and we started talking to each other, although we've been talking on and off for 10 years about this. But finally contracts were signed in 2012, and we've been working on this game ever since. I think the shackles are really off this time. You've got to a place where you can have a battlefield with air-to-air combat, flying creatures versus flying creatures, air-to-ground combat, massive monsters, giant spiders, giants that will grab a man up and then fling him to the ground or eat his head off, and wizards, of course, and spells, and we're not just talking little piddly spells, we're talking massive comets being pulled down from the sky to land on the enemy. So in that case, it's obviously fantastical, and that's where the Warhammer IP specifically really fits into this. The Warhammer franchise has always done this grim, dark, over-the-top, humorous violence and war, and it was just a natural partner for us in our first fantasy adventure. The difference between, we're calling them races rather than factions, because they are utterly different from each other. I mean, it's no longer history games by their very nature, or humans versus humans, so they have very similar value dynamics. You know, they want the same things by and large. They want a large empire to tax the citizens and gaining wealth and power. So the empire, the humans, they're pretty much like that. They're the most traditional of the Total War races, but even they're quite heightened in that respect. But they will still tax their citizens. The emperor will still try and make sure they're by and large happy and united. The orcs, on the other hand, aren't interested in collecting taxes from people. They're all about war and conquering, and so they have a forward momentum. So in the campaign experience is very different. You've got to keep going, you've got to build a critical mass and create what's called a war. And if you don't do that, if you get stopped by a natural geographic boundary like a mountain range, or if the dwarfs, for instance, get it together and stop you from advancing, then the orc momentum is going to be lost, and the orcs are going to start infighting, and you're not going to do very well in the campaign. Dwarfs again going to have a totally different mechanic. They get offended very easily, they're very grumpy, they take grudges very seriously. So we're thinking about some kind of grudge mechanic, and for them it's about reconquering lost glories. They had a massive empire along the mountain range in the Warhammer world called the World's Edge Mountains, and they were the Kara's Angkor, to say it in Dwarfish. But that's gone. You know, they have a few isolated outposts, and you've got to relink those holds back together again to bring back that grandeur that the dwarfs have lost. Vampires again, totally different mechanic. I'm not going to talk about that today though. Creative Assembly is a very big studio these days, probably the biggest in the UK actually. And so we've got a lot of facilities that allow us to beta test inside. But you know, when we release the game, you guys all know.
I am unstoppable. I see it now. The beasts that will devour